Hello, everyone. Welcome to the open house from the archive at India Foundation for the Arts. As some of you know, India Foundation for the Arts is an organization that supports and implements projects in the various art forms across the country. We've been doing this over the last 27 years, and the outcomes of the many projects that we've implemented, over 700 at this point, are out there in the public domain as books, films, exhibitions, productions, concerts, archival material, websites, games, in many different forms. What we also do is we keep copies of the work that comes out of these projects in the IFA Archive. And in 2018, we started this archive. We launched it in both its physical and digital form with support from the Indorama Charitable Trust, who continue to support the work of the IFA Archive. Other than keeping this material safe, again, as many of you know, the work that comes out of these projects at IFA, the copyright of all the work belongs to the scholars and artists, and to use it in any form, you would need their written permission. But the IFA Archive is a sort of a catalog, a space where you can come and see what kind of material these projects have thrown up. But other than keeping this material safe, we also want to engage in discussions around the archive, around archiving processes, about best practices, about the hurdles that some of the artists and scholars have faced, and how they imagine the material that they have deposited at the archive to be used in the future. And we know that scholars have traditionally used archives a lot for their work, but our hope is that this IFA archive, since it has so much material from practitioners as well, is also going to be a resource that practitioners use for their future work. So with that, and as you know, this is a Zoom meeting. You are either watching us here or you're watching us live on Facebook. House rules, there is a Q&A box. So if you have any questions for our speakers, you're going to put it out there. And at the end of the discussion today, they are going to have time to respond to your questions. If you have any other comments, then please use the chat section of this call to use. So with that, I will hand over this to Aishika Chakraborty, the archivist at IFA, to introduce the two speakers today and tell you a little bit about what they're going to speak about.
Thank you, Arundhati, and good evening, everyone. As the archivist at IFA, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the IFA Archive Open House, focusing on conversations around the archival materials we have in our vast repository. Throughout these sessions, we hope to be able to share some of these materials with you in all their complexity and diversity, and hope they will inspire many of you to visit the IFA Archive. Furthermore, we hope that these sessions will address questions and concerns that art and culture archives raise, adding new arguments and ideas to the discussion. For our third IFA Archive Open House today, we have with us Aishika Chakraborty and Preethi Athreya in the panel. Aishika Chakraborty is a professor and director of School of Women's Studies, Jadavpur University. Her research interest spans from the gendered history of the Hindu widows of colonial Bengal to the many journeys of women dancers from colonial and post-colonial Bengal. Her areas of specialization are women's question in India, feminist performance and practices, and popular and erotic performers of India. Aishika has published articles and worked as guest editors of special issues of South Asian history and culture and Economic and Political Weekly. She has contributed chapters in edited volumes and has written editorial articles for daily newspapers. Preethi Athreya, with a background in classical Indian dance, has been working with the Indian contemporary dance scene as a performer, choreographer, and facilitator. She has been engaged since early 2000 in creating a personal movement language that reflects her relationship with her context, being at the same time open to new ways in how we may relate to the body. Preethi is the founder of Charcoal, a platform for artistic collaboration, as well as one of the co-founders of Basement 21, a practice-based performance collective in Chennai. Aishika and Preethi will first present their works, and then Arundhati and I will join them in a conversation. We will take audience questions at the very end of the session. Now, without further ado, I'd request our first speaker, Professor Aishika Chakraborty, to please take the stage.
Thank you so much, IFA. Thank you so much, Vishwadeep and Arundhati, for giving me the opportunity to revisit my own archive, my memories. Because history ends where memory begins, and also kind of memory begins where history ends. So, and that's where we need an archive for reminding ourselves, for remembering and piecing together old memories to bring out, kind of refresh it once again. So as Vishwadeep already introduced me, because I know that I have become an accidental dance scholar, because I was primarily trained as a gender historian who also danced. But while writing about, when I actually left dancing, I felt the need to write about dance. And so writing and then thinking about my own dance journeys, or the dance journey of my mentors, Dr. Manjushree Chaki and Ranjabati Sarkar, and these two feminist dance makers who impacted a very different performative, intellectual, and different type of body dynamic in the dance map of Bengal modern dance, it gave me an opportunity to rewrite not merely their journeys, their histories, but also look back at the history of the beginnings, the history of Bengal modern dance. So my story begins with Rabindranath Tagore as I move forward to explore the enigmatic journeys of Uday Shankar, Amala Shankar, and then I explored also the subaltern performance, the politicization of performance by IPTA. But finally, of course, my focus zooms into the two very, very formidable dance makers, Manjushree and Ranjamurthy, who not merely deviated or transgressed from the proximate dance movements, not only from the so-called hegemonic, hagiographic, Brahmanic, classical tradition, something that is embedded deeply in our scriptural, something that is very sacrosanct, something that is rooted in Natya Shastra, but also give it a more outer and wider landscape. Because Manjushree Chaki was born in 1934 in Murshidabad, and her life actually mapped many boundaries, it traversed and traveled across many areas from Murshidabad to Pabna. It was undivided Bengal. And then after partition, she came back to Calcutta and then started once again her journeys from Africa to America. And with her, I think, her own body lines changed. And it also it gathered so many new moments, new movements, collected a variety of other physical traditions within her own dance. So while writing about my project that was called Bengal Breaks Through, History, Legacy, and the Politics of Gender of Indian Modern Dance, I moved backward and forward in time with the journeys of Manjushree and Ranjabati, from Pabna to Calcutta, from Nigeria to New Paltz, and witnessed many paradigm shifts within a very, very short period of time. With Ranjabati, I think there is another paradigm shift within the syntax of Navanrittu, that the new dance movement, where Manjushree gave her dance a new diction, kind of she re-christianed her own dance as Navanrita, which meant new dance. So that the entire process of redefinition of modern dance started with her own decolonization. As she was in the USA during the 1960s and 1970s, and her early experiments with modern dance began in New Paltz, New York, where New York itself became the dance capital of modern dance. But simultaneously, there is a pressure on an Indian dancer to present the reified Indian classical, to present something that is truly authentic, pure, and the dancing body from South Asia, the sari-clad woman who is kind of representing her own tradition in the diaspora, was forced to present something like very akin to Manipuri, Kathakali, Bharatnatyam, to become Radha once again. So when Manjushree wanted to go back to her own creative roots, that could be Tagore, Shankar, or that could be her own rendition, her own intake from Martha Graham, or something from Alvin Ailey, and when she was ready to renegotiate her own creative contemporary, blurring the binaries between the East and West, Occidental and Oriental, what was the politics of the diaspora, or what was the demand from the Western audience, from that Indian dancer, and how not to deviate from her own classical, from her own Indianness. So I think during the 1960s and 70s, I felt the need of the archive, the press reviews that I have been able to collect, which were mostly from Dance Magazine, New York Times, and also many other small magazines and daily newspapers circulated from New Paltz and wherever Manjushree traveled in those places, will give some very important and insightful information about the challenges of a new or kind of a not so very contemporary dancer who dared not challenge the stereotypes of Radha, Sita, or Sakuntala. So what were the major challenges in the 1960s and 70s for a young contemporary dancer who wanted to explore more, wanted to push her boundaries, wanted to break away from the classical syntax? But when Manjushree came back to India, it was early 1980s, and early 1980s or by mid 1980s, we all know it was a time when women's movement, or feminist movement as a whole, gathered momentum, and 1980s witnessed the famous East-West encounter, the encounter that discovered Chandralekha and Kumudini Lakhia, who successfully slashed across the dead weight of some classical forms. But for me, once again, there I found Manjushree and also her newly formed Dancers Guild and her daughter Ranjabutti face the encounter in a very different way, because the encounter, while it was also a time of stock taking of Indian modern dance, it wanted something that is refreshingly new, resoundingly contemporary, and where the women's body was represented in a non-narrative, non-literal, and non-linear fashion. Manjushree, while coming back from her journeys from Africa and America, was too keen to represent her own old obsession with Rabindranath Tagore in her own way, in her own version, in her own interpretation, through her new interpretation. But her own Tomari Matir Konna, which is based on Tagore's Chandalika, though it actually talked about Dalit feminism, though it challenged Brahminic patriarchal classical tradition, and though it actually broke apart some classical forms and gave birth to what she called chemical synthesis or synthesization or interweaving various classical, non-classical, quotidian practices of Indian dance in her new way was not acceptable before the audience of contemporary dance. So the East-West encounter wrote off or discarded Manjushri's new style as passé, as outmoded, as an old hat. It seemed that she was repeating it was kind of a repeating of the old 1930s tradition that belonged to Tagore's Shantiniketan or Uday Shankar. It was nothing new. So 1980s demanded once again, even in India, it demanded not a narrative style, but a different kind of body language where we are moving forward to experiment with the no story approach. So Manjushri was in a double bill situation because back home in Calcutta, the Calcutta press wrote off her once again for she blatantly deviated from the authentic Rabindric style, from the authentic Shankar Gharana. So I think for me, the archive that I had to handle during my IFA's research journey put me in a very tricky situation, because when I searched for Manjushri's voice, Manjushri's agency, and I also looked at the critics or the audience's reviews about her dance, I found that archive is sometimes is built up on some hegemonic and hagiographic sources. And there are some omissions, there are some delete, there is some erasers. When I visited NCPA that hosted the famous East-West encounter, after the first East-West encounter, there was not a single mention of Manjushri's arrival and Manjushri's teaching of the Marimatir Konna. And from the next year, I found some criticism because she was in the habit of inviting flags from critics. And I think now it's a different time to rewrite our own histories, to revisit our own dance journeys, and also to talk about the contemporary dance history, to acknowledge the diversity, the pluralism, and many feminisms that stage that the feminist dance makers staged and wrote on the stage. So many years after, I think Manjushri, who once dared to, or kind of, she was used to dance in empty houses. So many years after, I think she has been able to draw an audience, and her contemporary choreographies, both within Calcutta and outside, it became kind of a acceptable before the contemporary dancer, for the contemporary dancer, contemporary audience, and the audience who became used to her style. Today, I must thank Dancers Guild, because Dancers Guild was also one of my case studies. Dancers Guild helped me to move, to carry forward the research within Dancers Guild. And today I am sitting inside Dancers Guild building. And this is the dance floor where Manjushri used to teach us, and our rehearsals actually carried on here in this house. So I thank Dancers Guild for the opportunity to use this space for today's presentation. And I think I have too many challenges before writing about Manjushri, because being an insider does not necessarily help a historian or a researcher to create a biopic of one's mentor, because sometimes it works as a handicap. It is a burden, a kind of uncritical veneration of someone whom I'm used to. But Manjushri, as I said, all through her life, almost all through her life, she was used to vehement criticisms. But her signal departures from the from the contemporary or classical dance traditions, and her capacity to shock the audience, to be unpredictable all the time, became her signature, became her choreographic statement. But as we took our time, she also kind of managed to write her voice within and against the hegemonic, against the patriarchal, against the male stream as well as the mainstream. And her journey as well as Ranjaboti's journey, I think both of their life stories, both of their private, personal, and performative selves, was a record of feminist politics or performance at a global political moment of Indian history. I think I may ask Bishwadeep to show some of the slides that I have managed to collect and gather during my research. So there are some pictures, some visual images where yes, this is a famous photograph from by Avinash Pasricha from Tomari Matir Konna, that is Rabindranath Tagore's Chandalika. This is Ranjavati Sarkar in one of her myriad experimental move. This is a dance painting by Tagore and Manjushree as Notir Puja, Srimoti, Ranjavati once again, and Tagore's dance painting. I deliberately use the dance paintings of Tagore, kind of images that he wanted to envision. And so my history actually looked at women's voice, agency, their subjectivities, and I privileged women's memories, memoirs, autobiographies, and I took personal interviews of many women dancers, starting from Amula Shankar to many others, and I delved into their autobiographies. Next slide. And this is the famous tug of war. All of us actually are aware of this Pushan. So I think it's time to break away and to overlap. And yes, and I think Ranjavati's, this quotation also resonated Chandralekha's in many ways, that we need to get free from the shackles of tradition and to reclaim it in our own terms. Next slide. Yes, so these are the three paradigm shifts in Bengal modern dance that shaped Indian modern dance simultaneously, Tagore, Shankar, and IPTA. And we don't have one single point of reference to start our journey. And there is always experimentations, which is transcultural, transnational, and translocal. And all these three are, particularly Tagore, Shankar, and IPTA, deviated clearly from the scriptural, from the sacrosanct classical tradition of India. Next. Yes, I think we can go on. Some of the pictures that I talked about that so after 2000, I think I felt it to document their lives and their works, to write their journey and the many journeys of the mother-daughter, Manjushree and Ranjavati, which covered vast areas of the Atlas and that explored the deepest bottoms of emotions. So forging links between the gendered representations, cultural constructions, and individual experiences of dancers. The project that I carried on under IFA, which is sponsored by IFA, that mapped the public staging of a woman's subjectivity in multiple dimensions, such as the personal, social, political. And here I linked and also kind of disjointed a dancer's own life story. And by seeing her own embodied politics, that became an invasive repertoire of her own life patterns and cultural crossings. Thank you so much. I think that this is in a nutshell.
Thank you, Aishika, for such an enriching presentation. Now, I would request Preethi to please start your presentation.
Hi, thanks a lot for inviting me. It's quite nice that you asked Aishika and me to talk today, because it's through the IFA that we know each other also. And my collective Basement 21 invited her to talk about the history of contemporary dance from Bengal, in fact, and all that she showed us in a nutshell is what was a long lecture here a couple of months ago. And why that's important is because when it comes to dance, it's extremely hard to map a history, especially in this country, because the sources are all so different, the preoccupations are different, the urgencies are different. And therefore, the practice is also from very, very different philosophies. And it's important to know that when we are working together, or when we are trying to understand a whole scene and how to go forward. I have been supported by the IFA for 2 performance creations. One was called Light Doesn't Have Arms to Carry Us, and it was very much to do with how music can become a visual form through the body. If you take away the oral quality of music, what happens to it visually through the body? This was the search in Light Doesn't Have Arms to Carry Us. The other work was called the Jumping Project, which is what I'm focusing more on talking about today. This was a piece where I had invited a whole group of people, performers and non-performers, dancers and non-dancers from all walks of life, sports people, dance people, to engage with the act of jumping, because I was very interested in movement that could be free of the kind of posturing and gesturing that comes into the dancing body because of the stylization, because of the act of being looked at. And I was looking for a certain kind of honesty in movement. I was looking for the honest body, and jumping doesn't leave much room for artifice. What goes up must come down. It's exhausting. And the sheer fatigue produces a certain very real body. And this was interesting for me as a dramaturgical exercise. Having said that, I want to talk a little bit about how I understand the word archive, because that's what we're talking about today, isn't it? An archive is any kind of first-hand information that a public can have about an author. Not interpreted by somebody else, not dressed up in any other form, but a direct access to film, photograph, writing, painting, voice, etc., that takes you straight to the person themselves. This is how most people understand the archive. And why is that important? It's important for you to make your own, to form your own associations with it. Now, sometimes this has to be aided and abetted a little bit by understanding a history alongside that, and it's not enough to have the archive alone, but by itself, it's such a powerful tool, this repository of original knowledge or original work. I remember a project in 2016, an invitation from Dr. Ong Keng Sen in Singapore when he was heading the Singapore International Festival of Arts. He had he's somebody who was a lawyer, so he comes from a law background, and he had made this project called the Archive Box. Now, what was the Archive Box? He had invited about 6 choreographers, mostly from Japan, I think, because some kind of a funding story there, but 6 performers to create an archive of their work. And what was the purpose of the archive? It was to give it to another artist each, for them to make a new work out of that, which had nothing really to do with reconstructing the original work, which had nothing to do with contributing to one line of inquiry, but then using the materials of the archive box that you had received in order to make a new creation. Now, this was fascinating for several reasons. I was one of the respondents. I got the box of an artist called Yukio Suzuki. Now, this was interesting. Most people had an assortment of things in their boxes. They had the archive consisted of influences, reading influences, written influences, actual paintings or games that they were playing with. Very rarely was there a reproduction of the original work as archival material. Very rarely was there a video or but there was a combination of things that went into making this archive box. So sometimes it was material, it was fabric, sometimes it was light bulbs, sometimes it was strings and twines and poems and a collection of things which took you to a world. And as creators, I think it is the richness of this world which is important to pass on. If you think of the work of the archive as some kind of passing on, then it is the richness of this world and never just the product of what you do. Yes, that there is an importance for the product because ultimately that's what reaches people as performance, but that's only a part of the function of an archive. An archive is something, it's like teaching literature or teaching any kind of performance art. You can only go around it. You can train in various ways, but the actual act of creation is something that must be fueled by a lot of other inputs. So I was thinking a little bit about this when I was invited to talk about the archive. What I have given to the IFA, or rather what I submitted to the IFA when I made the proposal for the jumping project, was a small process video, which takes me back to the root of what the jumping project was all about. If I was to reduce this work, I would reduce it to two objects, actually. The one would be a set of mathematical scores. You see, there were about 10 performers and everybody was either A, B, C, or D. And depending on which group you belonged to, you had a set of instructions with time codes and ways of counting for you to know when you had to jump, when you had to turn, when you had to move. And God help you if you didn't, because accidents happen. So this was one thing. The scores were one thing you can reduce the project to as the spine of it or as the blueprint of it. And the other is the metronome, because we worked with a metronomic time and we worked with systems of counting based on the metronome. So if I was to create an archive box of this project, I would put these two things into that box, very definitely, I would like to take you into watching this little process video that I submitted. If I may request Vishwadeep to play it with the volume a little bit low. This gives us a little bit of an insight into how the thing started or why it was important to think of the blueprint of the work. So this was in 2015. We'd already started working in 2013, and it was not a supported project at that time. It was a bunch of people whom I called and said, come and try this with me. There were actors, there were sports people, friends. This was all in spaces in Chandralekha's center. There was an open courtyard, this little square pit. It was created by Dashrath Patel. It was a sort of an installation. And people could watch from all four sides. And for a very long time, all of us held these sheets of paper like the Bible that would guide us through the whole work, because it was impossible to memorize and jump at the same time. It was really exhausting. So as you can see, this kind of counting and this way of memorizing was very, very fundamental to understanding how to move through the work. So as far as the physicality of this project went, it was a very reduced kind of physicality, but at the same time, it called for an enormous understanding of technique, and technique that was not easily available to, say, us as dancers, because it required to understand gravity and jumping in a way that the dance training does not normally take you through. So I actually hired a boxing coach and a parkour artist to take us through systems of training in how to look at footwork in boxing, to how to jump without hurting your knees. So that's Prabhakaran, the boxing coach. He's the president of the Boxing Federation here. And yeah, there were days when we would look at him and the tears would come, simply because it was so exhausting what he put us through 3.5 hours. That's Prabhu Mani, the parkour artist who worked with us. And if that wasn't enough, I was making these impossible scores to memorize all the time. Yeah, it took about 10 to 12 months to get the shape of the work under one's belt. I was very, very lucky. It was completely unsupported through all this time. And I had all these friends, many of them from Bombay, Sri Lanka, Delhi, Calcutta, who just landed up and said, okay, we'll try this with you. And the project unfolded this way. Perhaps we can pause the video now. Yeah, we don't have to go back to it. It was just to give you a sense of what that space was like. So this piece became a piece like this. We always recreated the space. We sort of simulated the space or the set each time in different ways, adapted it. And more recently, I was in Calcutta to recreate a part of the work. And the question became very much about what happens to something when you recreate it? What happens to a performance? You know, no story is ever told the same way twice. The moment it's said again, something changes. The moment a performer changes, the weight changes. You know, the story changes entirely. So what do you do with something as ephemeral as dance when you're trying to record it? Not just for the purpose of archiving, but for the purpose of, say, recreating it. What happens to that structure? So I was invited by the Pickle Factory Foundation in Kolkata recently I had chosen to work in an abandoned tram depot. There are some photographs of the tram depot. If we could look at them, I could take you through what happened. So this is the Belgachia tram depot, an extremely dusty, dirty, old part. I called it the graveyard of the trams. I had looked at it among other sites when I was called in to do this project last year. And I chose this place simply because it had a certain quality of arrival and departure very much, which had some kind of a dialogue with the urgency of the jumping project as well, you know, of how present you needed to be in the body. And there were elements in the space like iron rods, fiberglass sheets, and several other bits and bobs lying around that we used in the recreation of the work. Of course, part of the mathematical scores came into place. You can move through the photographs. There are not so many of them. We did do parts of the jumping that was extremely, you know, metric, but it was a 10-day workshop creation, and these were all new dancers. And the first question for me was, their question to me was, what happens if we forget? You know, and this was a good thing to also think about what happens when you cannot recreate something, you know, what happens when you let go of the need to be structured within that. And there's as much a story to tell in the forgetting as in the remembering. So it worked very well with some people allowing themselves to forget and allowing themselves to be seen as having forgotten, but not panicking about it. There is as much a story to tell. It is as interesting a body to watch as any other. It's as interesting a body to watch as the body that is extremely tired and fatigued trying to carry out the memory of that counting. So in that sense, for me, the archive of the scores was extremely successful in being repurposed once again, but not necessarily serving the same goal, but somewhere allowing itself to live differently, to be accessed differently, to be even discarded or rejected, because that did not become the most interesting story finally. It was interesting to see the forgetting, but it was much more interesting to see the presence of the bodies in their effort to do so. So I want to say that for my colleagues at the IFA as well, yeah, that's okay with the photos. Thank you so much though for putting up all of that. I want to say that you have a fantastic repository of works in your archive. And it's totally conceivable to think of recommissioning the repository you have for new creation. And that is something I would be wholly happy to assist with, because I feel there is a value in this. It's like Aishika was saying also.
It's already on the cards.
Okay.
Just to tell you, it's already on the cards. I think not this year, but the next year, there's separate budget for it. So it'll be a separate project. Like we'll call for applications from curators or other kinds of creative people who want to look at the archive and make something out of it. So that's completely on the cards and totally understandable. Only thing is they will need the permissions of all the scholars and artists whose work this is. IFA cannot give permission for that. So it will be accessible only to that extent.
Fabulous.
Sorry to come in here, but I thought I'll just respond to your
fantastic
provocation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for me, that's the whole thing. The purpose of an archive has to, there is the dance practitioner who's looking for accessing what has been done, you know. I always remember all of us discussing that there is no point in thinking original. There is no such thing as an original, but there is a thing as an authentic. And how do you make something authentic? You have to know what's happened before, who's asked these questions, how have they dealt with it. So this serves a purpose. But to go forward, it is incredibly interesting, not just the finished works, but also all the things that gave rise to that way of thinking. And that's what is most exciting, you know. Chandralekha's book of poems, Rainbows on the Roadside, fantastic archival material on how she observed life. And then you think about why certain aesthetic choices were made, and hey presto, it's not in the reference books about her, but it is in the book of poems that she wrote, you know. So I don't know, I think I'm happy to chat with all of you a little bit at the end of this.
Thank you, Preethi, and thank you, Aishika, for such wonderful, enriching presentations. Now, I would request Arundhati to please join us in the panel. And
yeah. I mean, maybe we could move to the to this gallery format. Yeah. Okay, so maybe Ishadeep, should I start with
I think so.
a question to both of you actually? And this, you know, often through our programs we say that part of the attempt is to connect theory and practice, to have this conversation happen. And archiving as a process is often seen as something that comes more naturally to theory, to scholars who use archives and work with archival material, and also constantly archive their own work, which goes back into spaces that hold these materials. But but both of you are both scholars and practitioners. So as practitioners and specifically performers, what do you think are some of the questions that come up, some of the problems or hurdles that you see in archiving your own work for the future, but also accessing other practitioners' works that may or may not be available for your own practice? So if you can just like talk a little bit about how you go about it, what questions come up. Yeah, Preethi, you want to start off, and then maybe Aishika can join us.
I would say that what we're trying to do here in Chennai is actually encourage a few more process sharings, you know, in the making of work, because let's admit that when we actually put out a work, the first iteration of it is hardly its full form. It's the first time it meets an audience, and there's many things that have to settle down. And most often it's very hard to get more than 2 shows, 3 shows going. So a work is very prematurely dead before it attains a certain maturity in performance. So a more interesting way of then developing work is actually to invite people into open studio kind of situations and to show a bit, talk a bit, share a bit, look at reflections. And this is part of how an archive grows as well, that it grows together with a public that is watching you think and make decisions also over time. And that familiarity is very important in building this audience as well as practitioner base. And therefore, when you don't have a culture of this happening, it's very hard to know what the world or what the universe of a particular person is. And that universe is not just the performance, right? That universe is also, like many of us actually get inspired by, not so much by dance, but by maybe sometimes a work of visual art, or perhaps a lecture somewhere, or you know, a sculpture somewhere else, or you know, a piece of music. So there's many travels that happen, and the ability to tap into a person's world and universe is something to enable. And that's, I think, a bit challenging, because we don't really have a very structured sort of a way of supporting performance development. So we try to do that in our collective a little bit by hosting these work in progress sharings, by actually walking into open rehearsals, by encouraging ways of talking about the work, around the work, which then we record as well as possible and put it out. And that I do think is very useful for a lot of people, both for the practitioner as well as the potential practitioner or the potential viewer, you know. In all respects, it's kind of useful then. But Aishika, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I think I must thank IFA for inviting myself and Preethi in this particular conversation, which talked about archive, and also because as a South Asian dancer or dance scholar, we all know that the history of South Asian dance scholarship, dance practice primarily tilted in favor of the pure national classical. So when we talk about contemporary and when we talk about archiving contemporary dance, we do acknowledge the fact that even this contemporary has a long history of defiance, and it has immensely and incredibly contributed to the Indian dance making exercise. So we have already built up an archive, and that archive is no less old than, because as I said, I have started with Tagore, I have started with the Shankar, IPTA, and there are several other dots. We need to join the dots all over the Indian dance map, spread and scattered across the Indian dance map, because IFA actually enabled me to travel and meet other contemporary dancers from Chennai, from Ahmedabad, from Delhi, from Bangalore. So I found that we speak in different languages. Our body moves in different directions, and we are trained in different or untrained in different grammars. Our body speaks different language, our vernaculars are different, and we do not follow any mode, any formula to dance it out, to speak. Our choreographic statements are different. I think that is the spirit of Indian contemporary dance makers, because we have to think that even today, even in this political historical moment, some of the issues that beset the dance world is something to do with, once again, Bharatnatyam, Devdasi, and caste gender factor. But even the contemporary dance had same class, caste, gender factor, same problems. But we have, as I said, our archive, the National Archive does not necessarily pay attention to the iconoclastic dancers who actually danced their own language and created, invented, innovated their own language and discarded sometimes, and the so-called given traditional formulas. So this archiving contemporary dance, it's a kind of an oxymoron, right? Because we know that contemporary dance has no history in India, has no history in our past, and it just actually kind of coming from the West or sometimes from no man's land. And YouTube is our only guru. And once again, we have no right to question the Guru Shishya Parampara. So in this kind of an embattled, contested zone, when we are going on dancing contemporary, when we are going on writing about contemporary, we are thinking about many contemporary movements and many contemporary ideologies that triggered those movements. We think that this kind of archiving our own memories and journeys is very important, and it is almost kind of an urgent necessity in this at this moment.
Right. So I have a question for both Aishika and Preethi. So both of you have mentioned how archiving contemporary dance can be helpful in future. My question is, what kind of use do you see for your materials that both of you have submitted to IFA and is currently present in our IFA collection? Who could be accessing and using this? And would it be only scholars or artists too? That's my question to both of you. If you can say a few words.
Actually, I'll add something there because Preethi has already given a provocation earlier. So I would add that and say, to make it a little more engaging and fun, if you did have some budget and you had to, imagine that this is not your work, somebody else's, and you had to make use of it and create something, what would you make? What kind of work would come out of this if you had the opportunity to do it as artists?
So first of all, I feel like what I've given you guys is not enough by way of an archive. So I think what you have is a documentation of the final performance, the very first one. So that's just not enough for the way the work grew in number, size. It became a one-member show at one point of time, so there are many exciting things. It crossed architectural spaces and forms. So I would have to give you more things for it to become a live thing. But if I had a box like that, if I had a set of tools like that of someone's archive, my interest would be, first of all, to access the archive of a non-performance person, to then see what is the ephemeral quality that it can lend itself to. You see, what if I took on a very theoretical research archive? What then could be the dimension of, what could be the poetic dimension of that? What could be the non-linguistic dimension of that? Where could it anatomically come to life? This would be my interest as a sort of or somebody who's doing a museum curation, for example. I would be very interested in maybe the outcome would not necessarily be a dance work, but then it would be a choreographic thinking of how to place certain things, and that would be a very exciting sort of a play.
Yeah, Aishika, what would you do?
Your question, the second one is for Preethi, I thought. No.
Yeah, but also you in some way, that if you had an opportunity, say, to use all the dance material, yours and other people's, which is there at the IFA archive, what kind of a project might you imagine from there?
Yeah. So actually, number one, for me, the question that Vishwadev asked, as I said, that my methodology was a historian's methodology. That is an archivist methodology. First of all, I collected all the diaries, written notes, press reviews primarily on Manjushree Ranjavati and also from Tagore's writing. And I interviewed widely women dancers, and not merely the Bengali modern dancers, but also I went to interview Kumudini Lakia, Mallika Sarabhai, because Mrinalini Sarabhai passed away during the course of my research, and Chandra was not there, but I also interviewed other dancers who were trained under Chandralekha in Chennai. So the material that I have been able to give to IFA Archive was the interviews, that is the oral histories of modern contemporary dance, and particularly the pioneers, the feminist pioneers who rocked the stage in the 1980s. If I kind of give if I have that kind of, as Preethi said, the budget and the wings to fly, then I would have kind of traveled outside India. And because contemporary dance as well as feminist movement in the 1980s, 1970s onwards, it's a different kind of waves. And we need to kind of see the world and our own nation together sometimes, because there are too many similarities. Some of the stories of women were written simultaneously. Some of the movements were actually happening simultaneously. The second wave feminist movements in the 1960s and in the 1970s also, some women's movements were happening almost simultaneously. The International Women's Day 1975, Manjushree Sarkar was a part of the performative troupe that was staged in Mexico City. She was in USA at that time. So I will like to have a global frame to rewrite my history of Indian contemporary dance, because Manjushree and Ranjavati, they actually migrated from India to Africa and then to India. I think these areas need to be kind of looked together. There are certain beads scattered all over, and we need to weave them all together. Many stories, race, class, caste, gender, at every intersection, at every interface, we have a different story to tell. And that can be hard, or that can be said or written in their own language. But dance, be it vernacular, be it narrative, be it non-narrative or abstract or no story, I think contemporary dance has its own language, and feminist voice has its own power to move the world, to move the stage. I think if I have some time, if I have some more money, I would visit New York Library, the Dance Archive, and I would meet some people, the Columbia State University, where Manjushree carried on her experiments. She was a student of modern dance there. And Ranja's early experiments in 1970s, and our Mirabai Nritya Katha, there is no recording of that dance, Shobola, Shama, that she staged widely in Los Angeles. And she talked about her way of third world feminism, that if you look at me as an exotic dancer, I will also look at your body, the so-called white body, that you are also exotic to me. So the auto-exoticization. Manjushree was one of those first women dancers. She challenged, or she critiqued the auto-exoticization, the veneration of the classical style, and the look at the sari-clad kumkum and everything that is Indianness to become an embodied representation of Indianness. She challenged that kind of a representation, just stereotype. So I think I need some time to work on her early days, 1960s and 70s, which are not documented. There is no archive, and some visual material is there, no video representation. no video documentation, and also Ronja's early encounters. So those are the major gaps in my research.
Thanks, Aishika. Vishwadeep, you want to take the questions that have come up?
Yeah, sure. So we got a couple of questions. So Dipesh Pandya said that thank you for these rich presentations. Please can Preethi share the name of the artist who initiated the archive box project? Thank you, Preethi.
Dr. Ong Keng Sen, Kengsen, Keng Sen.
Right. And another question I'll take. So Robin Raju said, I think it's a common question to both of you. Robin Raju said that how does one choose what to archive? Does the choice influence how the work is read and interpreted? And if yes, how does one ensure that revisiting an archival work stays an inspiration for a new work rather than becoming a recreation of the archived work itself? So, Aishika?
Though I think I didn't get the question right, I think. But I think we need to approach the archive with little bit of caution as well. As I just said in my brief presentation, that archive is also full of omission, full of eraser and exclusions. Because when I actually visited some of the libraries and some archives, I found there are some lacks, absences, silences about some dancers who had yet to make their mark in the dance map. So archive is not inclusive all the time. Archive also depends, or actually is met up by the choice of the archivist. If he or she is unbiased, and then we can have an impartial and unbiased archive. Because if you look at the colonial archive, there are two types of files, A category and B. So B's are in colonial history, the category B includes some, women related crimes, which were dumped later. So it's not in the miscellaneous, not in the judicial, police, ecclesiastical, nowhere. Some of the crimes like abortion, infanticide, I'm just giving you an example. So archive is also very, very patriarchal sometimes. Archive is also very, very, official. So even in dance archive, there is some voice, some movements, some of them are, which is not so sacred, some of the movements which are absolutely erotic, vulgar, profane. So we need to dump them. We need to delete and erase them. So because now I'm working on the erotic dances of the nightclubs from Calcutta, I am facing this challenge all, it's a double challenge, because no history of erotic dance, and we have no cultural or performative history where we can call those dancers as dancers. So this is the challenge of the person who is looking at the archive, and also the challenge of the person who is building up this archive, who is making this archive, because we have learned to erase, omit, edit, and delete something which is not, in sync with our cultural tradition. So be it classical, be it modern, both of them are hegemonic, hagiographic, but there are many at the fringe, at the margins, and who will never ever become to come at the center stage. So that is the problem.
Preethi, would you like to respond? How does one choose what to archive? And how does this choice of what to archive become a way to read that work later?
I think the question of the archive comes into play at the research stage of any practice-based inquiry. So depending on the area, like for example, for the moment I have a new work ongoing, which is called Inheritage, which is about objects I've inherited and the notion of the cultural colonial notions that we're also inheriting along with these things. The study behind each object led me to various areas material history, of national history, of world history. The decision then to choose what is guiding your formation of inquiry then becomes crucial to what is becoming important to archive. So objects fall into systems of meaning always. There is a grammar in the system of meaning that they belong to, and your choice is whether you want to invert or change that system of meaning. So if you are making that kind of a choice, then there are certain kinds of factual details that need to be recorded, need to be possessed, especially in terms of ownership and belonging, you know. Do you belong to the object? Does it belong to you? How many people has it belonged to? How many people's writing is upon these objects? For example, there's a lecture on the history of the Indian Ocean world in 5 objects by this fantastic scholar called Isabel Hofmeyr, you know. And it traces the trade routes. There's cloth made in Surat, which went all the way to South Sudan in the 17th century and became part of clothing, you know, which is considered now to be authentic to that region. You know?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see what happens to things as they pass through time, hands, people. So then your archive has to be specific to how you are visualizing your creative output. And therefore you need to hold on to the facts, not all the facts that are present, but a choice of what guides the questioning to become deeper and more complex. In this case, it is ownership and systems of meaning for me. So therefore I would choose a certain set of things over others.
Okay, then there is another question. Could you share experiences of lightness in the archive, especially historical archive? So this is Anahita Ganju, and I had asked her, could you explain lightness? She hasn't, but if you want to respond with whatever meaning.
Lightness.
Yeah. Could you share experiences of lightness in the archives? Especially historical archives. I didn't understand the question. By lightness, I mean playful, she says. Experiences of playfulness in the archive, considering that historical archives often need energy, often serious energy to simply to be read as a whole, despite gaps in research. So
yes, it's always fascinating, intriguing, engaging to visit, to dig into the archive. Archival materials, they are absolutely the splendid thing for anybody. Just to browse over those materials are itself a very, very recreational thing, I think. So if you're in the habit of, if you kind of to consult archive, so I think yes, it is. It's a very energetic thing. I think, yes, it is. And it's not always something very, very serious. It's just like reading some old stories or getting some new facts. Sometimes just to read like the kind of crime thriller kind of a, you know, that feeling kind of comes back. If you're looking at the police files, it's kind of reading a crime thriller, or in fact, more exciting than that.
Preethi, any response from you? Have you had these experiences of playfulness in a historical archive?
What to say, Arundhati? Everything is play only. I mean, the whole business is without serious play. There is no work within the arts. I mean, I'm speaking on behalf of all of us present here, whether it's the IFA or Aishika or me. I think, I don't know, one aspect of lightness for me is always in how I'm trying to share the material with a bunch of interpreters or collaborators, you know, and how it gets understood or trashed or questioned, then begins to, you know, see how it lives in all of us. So that's kind of important. But the act of unearthing information is part of the job. And like Aishika says, the more you enjoy the search, the more rich the search gets, you know, and the lightness becomes part of it. You crave it. So.
Thanks. I think we have answered all the questions here. I can't see any other question. Yeah. Oh, yeah, there's one question for us, Vishwadeep. Dipesh Pandya is asking, I'm interested in knowing what kind of demographic are now visiting the IFA archives. Is it artists or scholars? You are the best person to respond to that, actually.
Right. So you all know that archives are used by scholars, and it's a misnomer. I mean, not a misnomer. I mean, in a way, archives for decades have been used by scholars for historical research and other scholarly research. But we are blessed that our archive have been visited by scholars as well as artists. So I think it's a very good, healthy mix. In terms of access, we get requests from all the spheres, from both the scholars and the artists as well. So the basic idea was behind this open house was to engage the artists more, talk about how archival materials could be used by the artists, because scholars, we all know that they use it. For the artists, I think it will be a very important tool for new avenues to work on. Arundhati?
Yeah, just to also mention parallelly that our colleague Vishwadeep and my colleague Ritika Mishra looks after a program called Archives and Museum Program at the IFA, where we're doing what Preethi is asking us to do with our archive. That's where we are trying to engage with, so we become partners, we partner with other archives and museums, and then we do a call for proposals for projects that people want to do using that material. For example, recently, Kamra, which is the queer media archive that is there, housed at the National Law School in Bangalore. We have a partnership with them, and we did a call, and people wrote to us saying, this is how we would like to use the material, and this is the work we would like to make. There we have one set of projects that are creative projects, only for practitioners and for creative outcomes. And the other set of projects are scholarly projects. And we are very happy actually that for each of those calls, we do get equal amounts of application from for scholarly as well as for creative projects. It could also be because IFA is seen as an arts organization and a practitioners organization, though we support a lot of research work for scholars as well. And it's a good thing that we probably have our networks reach out to artists. So we do get a lot of calls from artists as well, applications.
Also, I want to add that IFA actually enables us, like the scholars who wanted to write something that we are not trained in. As I started by saying that I'm an accidental dance scholar. So without IFA, that took some serious interest in my dance research, I have been able to embark on my academic project from my university, but which is successfully, it's an Indian institute that funded my dance research. So that's a space which is very open-ended, and you made possible the dialogue between the creativity or the practice and theory, that is scholarship and performance.
So actually, it's been our attempt that way to, even like all of you know, that the arts research program is open to both scholars and practitioners. And we have many practitioners who apply, and jury selects a lot of practitioners as well. But this is also a learning process for us, because often we ourselves are asking questions like, so when a practitioner does a research piece and says that my practice is my methodology for this research, we have to unlearn and relearn a lot of things we inherit as what is research, what is methodology, what is source. So we struggle a lot and we make a lot of mistakes, I'm sure, but we also struggle a lot, and each project then becomes a learning for staff at IFA as much through the help of the jury that we have. So,
and it's really all inclusive. It's really heterogeneous. Thanks. You are not kind of follow any formula for your grantees.
Hopefully not. Hopefully
it's very wide.
We all fall into patterns, I'm sure. And that's also the reason why, we shift jury, staff members rotate, shift, we move in and out, and that's also to keep it going and not fall into a pattern of
Yeah,
similar kind of work. Yeah. But thank you for it.
thank you so much.
engaging.
Yeah.
Bishadeep, I think we are done with all the
I think so,
questions.
yeah.
Maybe we can.
So thank you, Aishika and Preethi. We appreciate both of you making the evening so captivating and for enriching us with such a great presentation and discussion. I'd also like to thank everyone who participated and for being a patient audience who has made this session fulfilling with their very interesting questions which you took. And from all of us at IFA, a big thank you to the Indorama Charitable Trust for supporting the IFA Archive from its very inception and continuing to do so. The IFA Archive will be back soon with similar evenings. But before that, do join us for our next project showcase, where the projects supported by IFA are presented by the project coordinators. The next project showcase is by Ish Sherawat. So do join us on Thursday, February 23rd at 6:30 p.m. Thank you.
And Bishadeep, after the pandemic, our archive is open now. So everybody in Bangalore, or if you're visiting Bangalore, do connect up with Bishadeep and the archive and come and visit us. We'd be very happy to see you and take a look at the archive online before you come, so you know what material you're looking for. So we would invite you to the archive. Come and spend some time with us. Thank you.
Thank you.